All right, welcome back. Today's notes are going to be the final notes for this unit. This is the Nationalism case study on Italy and Germany, pages 16 and 17 of your packet. So let's get started. So before we begin, there's something you have to remember. There are three terms that we use interchangeably a lot, but actually have very different and distinct meanings that you have to be aware of, or you will be very, very confused. First and foremost, a state. A state is not like the state of Wisconsin. A state is a government. So, for instance, this is the Capitol building of the United States. So a government creates laws and rules for its people, says what is legal and what is illegal, what the punishments will be, how laws are created. So that's a state. A country is a physical place. So this is the state of the United States. This is the country of the United States. You can see the land, right? The mountains, the plains, the desert, the forests. It's the physical location. The nation are the people, specifically a large group of people that share a common history, culture, and language. And this is going to be very important because nationalism is the topic we will be covering today and will be one of the leading causes of the last topic we'll cover in class for this semester, which will be World War I. So what is nationalism? Nationalism is a belief that each nation should have its own country and state ruled by that nation. So it's the idea that the French, right, the French nation, the people who share French culture, French traditions, the French language, the belief that they should have their own country, their own land, and that land should have a government controlled by the French nation. So nationalism is the idea that each individual group that has a distinct culture, language, and traditions should have their own government and their own land that they get to rule for themselves. Now, this can be problematic because, as we'll see, that some states and countries have multiple nations within them, and this is going to lead to a lot of conflicts. So, is nationalism a force for unity or disunity? Does it unite people or does it tear people apart? So, for the instance of the case of the French Revolution, it was a very powerful force in uniting the French nation, uniting the people of France together, and then creating a state within the country of France that is ruled by the French nation. It was also used, though, to rip apart aging empires as nations within them demanded that they have their own nation states, as you'll see. So this red border here is the boundaries of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and within it you can see different countries and different nations, right? So the Hungarian nation are the people who live in Hungary, who speak the Hungarian language, Hungarian traditions, have a Hungarian history, and this is their country right here. But that is within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Romanians have their own language, their own culture, their own history, their own country, but they are controlled by the Austro-Hungarian state. Over here is the Ottoman Empire, another powerful force at the time. You can see that they control Egypt, they control large sections of the Middle East, they control Turkey, they control Macedonia, now known as Northern Macedonia, Albania, Greece, Bosnia, Moldavia, Wallachia. So they control these different nations and countries, but those are all under control of the government, the state of the Ottoman Empire. So we're going to see how this leads to problems. So let's look first and foremost at the Austrian Empire. The Austrian Empire, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was forced to split into two because Austrians and Hungarians saw themselves as two separate nations, and the ideals of nationalism said that the Austrians deserved to have their own nation without the Hungarians telling them what to do, and the Hungarians said they should have their own nation state without the Austrian nation telling them what to do. So this splits the Austro-Hungarian Empire in two. Looking over at Russia, over here Russia saw that its large orange area is the Russian Empire, and they saw what was going on, this rise of nationalism, and they knew that it was going to be trouble. So what they started was a process called Russification. And what they started doing is forcing the people who lived in all these different countries, so all these different nations who had their own histories, cultures, and traditions, the Russians started forcing them to speak Russian, started forcing them to no longer pass on their individual traditions. So my people's homeland, Poland right here, in the center, was part of the Russian Empire, and they started to force my ancestors to stop speaking Polish, stop wearing traditional Polish clothing, to stop celebrating traditional Polish holidays. Instead, the Polish people, under the policy of Russification, had to learn to speak Russian, had to learn how to live like Russians, eat like Russians, learn Russian history, so that the Polish nation would stop thinking of themselves as Polish and start thinking of themselves as Russian. You can see when you try to strip away people's culture and history and language, they don't really like this. There's Poland's flag right there, by the way. And so what wound up happening is in 1917, there was a revolution that overthrew the Tsar, the King of Russia, because all the different nations did not like that their culture, their history, and traditions and language were being wiped out. Right, but let's look at the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire also began to splinter. You'll remember the Ottoman Empire was created by the Ottoman Turks, who overthrew the Byzantine Empire, which was the eastern half of the Roman Empire after the Western Empire fell. So the Ottoman Turks are in control here for about 1,000 years, or for a few hundred years, not 1,000 quite, but a few hundred years, and they controlled Egypt, again, areas like Egypt. They controlled, down here is Israel, Palestine, Kuwait. They controlled Turkey. They controlled Macedonia, Greece, Albania, Bosnia, Romania, Moldavia. All these places had their own different languages, cultures, histories, and traditions, but they were controlled by the Ottoman state, the government of the Ottoman Empire. And so you started to see places like Greece over here, remember those guys, who have their own very distinct history. We spent a lot of time with them in the first semester. They decided to revolt and wanted to become their own independent nation state. That is, their own country ruled by a state, a government that is controlled by the Greek nation. So that tore those empires apart. But let's look at how it unified people. So Italy is a prime example of this. So Italians use their national feelings to create a single Italian nation state. You'll remember that Italy is where Rome was. It was the heart of the Roman Empire. We spent a lot of time with the Roman Empire in first semester, but ever since its fall, Italy had been broken up into separate kingdoms with different rulers, and large parts of the Italian peninsula was actually not even controlled by people who spoke Italian, but was controlled by foreign states. So, for instance, you had a chunk over here, and that was controlled by France. Austria controlled the northern chunk. France at different times controlled different aspects. So France controlled this island. At one point, they controlled Sardinia. Another point, they controlled Tuscany. And so Italy wasn't really unified, and they weren't really happy that they were being controlled by different states, and not just different states, but different nations, different people who didn't have anything to do with Italy. They, other than the fact that, well, they were once colonies of the Roman Empire, but that was thousands of years ago. So in 1848, the nationalists in Italy, the people in Italy who thought that Italy deserved its own nation state, they revolted and they tried to overthrow their different rulers and unite under a single Italian nation state, under a single country government controlled by the Italians. These were put down forcefully, as they tend to be happen sometimes. But by 1870, these revolts finally succeeded in uniting Italy as a single nation state, the one that we call Italy today. So it went from, if we're looking, all these separate different kingdoms right here, ruled by different people. But after 1870, Italy now was one single unified state under the control of the Italian nation. But let's take another example of how nationalism can unite a country. So let's take a look at Germany. Germany's been a very interesting case study. If you're looking at maps over the last several units, you've probably been very confused by these red borders that you're seeing where Germany is, right? So over here on the left, this is what used to be the Holy Roman Empire. Over here, the lines denote the German Confederation. What's important to understand is that Germany has all been splintered for most of its history into different kingdoms, controlled by different princes, different kings, different emperors, and loosely they're united under the Holy Roman Empire, but not really, right? So Bavaria over here, Bohemia, Saxony, Hanover, these different areas had their own leaders, their own kings, but they all spoke German. They were all part of the German nation. They had a shared language, history, and culture, and way of looking at the world. But they weren't united under a single state. At best, they had individual states that under the German Confederation agreed to work closely with each other, but they were still separate and independent states. Well, now there's the idea of we need to unify Germany into a single nation state. So the entire country, this entire region, the land, and the German nation, the people who speak German and who have German traditions, would be united under a single state, a single government. So by 1815, so after the Napoleonic Wars, there were about 39 separate states, governments, joined into a German confederation. So basically, these different governments agreed to work closely with each other, but were still independent. This confederation was controlled by Prussia up here, right, which extended beyond the German nation and the German countryside, and Austria-Hungary, right, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which again you can see expands beyond the borders over here of what would be considered the German country and were the German nation, right, the people inside here. So this confederation was controlled by both Prussia and Austria-Hungarian Empire. But eventually, Prussia became more powerful and kind of kicked Austria-Hungary out, took control from them, and this was all orchestrated under the leadership of a Prussian named Otto von Bismarck. Now, Bismarck is a very important person. You're going to want to remember who he was. Bismarck was the guy who united Germany into a single German nation state. So he got this control by basically getting the support of wealthy landowners, those nobles who had owned land for hundreds of generations. He got them to back him, and then through this was able to gain power and unite Germany. Let's take a little look at how this happened a little more specifically. So in 1871, Bismarck provoked a fight with France. So basically, Bismarck picked a fight with France. France invaded in what's called the Franco-Prussian War, and you had here the German Confederation. Over here in the southern German states, though, they didn't really want to join the war. They're like, no, we don't want to be part of the German Confederation. We want to be separate. So when France got upset with the German Confederation, he attacked, and these southern German states felt insulted. Like, how dare you attack us? We're not even part of this mess. And as a result, the southern German states threw their allegiance behind the Prussian emperor, naming him their Kaiser or king. The word Kaiser is going to be very important in our next unit on World War I. So they threw their support behind the Prussian Kaiser, naming him king. The end result of this was that you now have a united German nation state. The balance of power has now shifted. No longer is France the most powerful nation state in the world, and no longer is England. Number one, numero uno, is Germany, followed closely by the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland right here. And then third, France, the once powerful France that almost conquered everyone. Now they're in the third spot. So they're followed by the Austrians over here, the Russians, and the Italians. And this is the new balance of power that's set up, because now you got these three powerful nation states, and then you have other minor nation states that also are powerful, but not nearly as powerful as Germany, France, or the United Kingdom. All right, so that's where we're going to finish. Make sure to rewatch this if you need to, and we will recap at the start of the next class.